Welcome to Wicked Wealth. The GPS died 3 miles back, right around the time the pavement turned into red clay and gravel. Mark didn't care. He wanted off the grid. He wanted the true Appalachian experience for his wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids, Leo and Maya. They were 4 hours deep into the crooked spine of the mountains, surrounded by trees so thick they looked like a solid wall of black wood. The cabin they'd rented was a historic spot, which is just a nice way of saying it was a rotting pile of cedar and rusted nails tucked into a notch in the hills the locals called the Red Hollow. As they pulled into the clearing, the air felt different. It was heavy. It didn't smell like pine, it smelled like wet iron and old meat. "Dad, I don't like it here," Leo whispered from the back seat. He was 10, but he had that kid sense for when things were wrong. "It's just the mountain air, Bud," Mark said, killing the engine. The silence that followed was instant. No birds. No crickets. Just the sound of the engine cooling, tink, 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 like a countdown. By 9 p.m., the sun had dropped behind the peaks, and the darkness that filled the hollow wasn't normal. It was thick, like ink. They were sitting around a small fire pit when the dog, a golden retriever named Cooper, suddenly stood up. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stared into the tree line, his tail tucked so hard it was touching his stomach. Then, he started to whine, a high, thin sound that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "Cooper, come here," Mark called. The dog didn't move. Then, out of the darkness, came a sound. It wasn't a growl. It was a wet, rhythmic thumping. Like someone was hitting a heavy bag of flour against a tree. Cooper bolted. Not toward the house, but straight into the woods. "Cooper." "No." Maya yelled, starting to run after him. Mark caught her by the arm. "Wait," he said, his voice low. "Listen." From the woods, about 50 yards out, they heard one single, sharp yelp. It ended abruptly with a sound like a dry branch snapping. Then, silence. Then, that wet thumping started again, moving away from them, deeper into the brush. "We go inside now," Mark said. He didn't look back. They locked the doors. Every single one. The cabin didn't have much, just a main room, a small kitchen, and a loft where the kids slept. Around midnight, the scratching started. It wasn't on the door. It was on the roof. It sounded light. Too light. Like birds' feet, but with more weight behind them. Something was skittering across the shingles, moving from one side of the house to the other. Suddenly, Leo screamed from the loft. Mark scrambled up the ladder, flashlight shaking in his hand. Leo was backed into the corner of his sleeping bag, pointing at the small, rectangular window near the peak of the roof. It's looking, Leo sobbed. It's looking at me. Mark swung the light toward the glass. For a split second, he saw it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It was pale, the color of a dead fish's belly. It was thin, so thin its ribs looked like they were going to poke through its skin. Its arms were too long, ending in fingers that looked like needles. But it was the face that froze Mark's blood. It had no nose, just two slits. And it had no mouth, not a normal one. Just a small, circular hole lined with rows of tiny, needle-sharp teeth that moved like a lamprey's. The thing hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pipe, and vanished into the dark. We're leaving. Grab the keys, Mark whispered, descending the ladder. Sarah was already at the door, clutching a kitchen knife. Mark, the tires. I heard something outside 10 minutes ago. Mark looked out the side window. The SUV was sitting in the moonlight. All 4 tires were shredded. Not just flat, the rubber had been ripped away in long, jagged strips. That's when the thumping started again. This time, it was under the floorboards. The cabin sat on stilts because of the uneven ground. Something was underneath them. They could hear it dragging its body against the wood. Scrape. 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 Then, a floorboard in the corner of the kitchen erupted upward. A pale, spindly hand reached through the gap. It grabbed Sarah's ankle. She didn't even have time to scream before it jerked her down. Her leg snapped against the edge of the hole with a sound like a gunshot. Sarah. Mark lunged for her, grabbing her arms as she was dragged toward the dark gap. The creatures had emerged from the hole. Up close, it smelled like a slaughterhouse in July. It didn't bite her. It pressed that circular, needle-filled mouth against her calf and inhaled. Sarah's face went white instantly. You could see the blood being pulled through her skin, her veins turning black and then disappearing as the thing drained her. She didn't scream, she just went limp, her eyes rolling back as her heart struggled to pump nothing but air. Mark swung a heavy cast-iron skillet, catching the thing in the side of its head. It shrieked and retreated into the darkness under the house, taking a chunk of Sarah's leg with it. But there wasn't just one. More scratching. On the walls. On the door. The windows began to shatter, one by one. These things weren't just hungry, they were efficient. Mark pushed the kids toward the back closet. Get in. Don't make a sound. Don't breathe. He stood in front of the closet door with the skillet and the knife. The first one came through the window. Then 2 more through the hole in the floor. They moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, their pale limbs blurring in the moonlight. Mark went down first. He felt the needles hit his neck. He felt the sudden, icy cold as his life was vacuumed out of his body. He tried to fight, but his muscles turned to lead. The last thing he saw was the closet door being slowly, gently pried open by a long, pale finger. Leo and Maya didn't even cry. They couldn't. The air in the room felt like it was being sucked out. One by one, the things pressed their mouths to the children's throats. The thumping sound returned. It was the sound of the creatures' hearts, now full and heavy, beating with the blood of the family that wanted an adventure. The next morning, the sun hit the red hollow just like it always does. The cabin looked peaceful from the road. If you walked inside, you wouldn't find a drop of blood. Not one. These things don't waste a single drop. You'd just find 4 husks. 4 gray, shriveled shells of people, sitting exactly where they died. The locals don't go into the hollow. They know that the hills aren't just made of stone and dirt. They're made of hunger. And if you're looking for a quiet vacation, just make sure you aren't the only thing on the menu. Sleep well. If you can. The locals in Harlan County don't talk about the old Miller mine. It's been boarded up since 1954, not because the coal ran out, but because the men did. My brother, Jax, didn't believe in mountain tall tales. He believed in the $5,000 bounty a private collector was offering for a virgin Appalachian quartz cluster, the kind you only find deep, deep in the untouched veins. We weren't supposed to be there. We were supposed to be at a campsite 3 miles east. But Jax had the map, the headlamps, and the stubbornness of a mule. The entrance to the mine felt like a mouth. As we pried the rotted boards away, a gust of air hit us. It didn't smell like old dust. It smelled like copper and sour milk. It was freezing, but it was a wet, heavy cold that clung to your skin like a damp sheet. We go in, we find the vein, we get out, Jax said. His voice echoed down the shaft, sounding thin and fragile. Jax, look at the walls, I whispered, shining my light. The rock wasn't smooth. It was covered in deep, vertical grooves. Like something with long, hard fingers had been trying to climb out. We're about a half mile in when we heard it. Clack. 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 It sounded like 2 pool balls being hit together. It was coming from a side tunnel, one that sloped sharply downward into a pit the map didn't show. Is that a person? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. In here? No way, Jax said, but he gripped his rock hammer tighter. Then, a voice drifted up from the pit. Help! Is someone, help! It was a woman's voice. It sounded flat, though. No emotion. No gasping for air. Just the words, spoken like she was reading them off a grocery list. Jax swung his light into the pit. The beam cut through the dark, hitting a pile of white debris at the bottom. It wasn't rocks. It was bones. thousands of them. And they weren't just scattered, they were snapped clean in half. The centers looked like they'd been scrubbed out. The voice came again, closer this time. "Is someone, help?" But it wasn't coming from a person. A shape began to unfold from the shadows of the pit wall. It looked like a man, if a man had been stretched on a rack until his skin turned into translucent parchment. It had no eyes, just two dark, pulsing pits. And its jaw hung down to its chest, connected by thick, black strings of saliva. "Run," Jax breathed. We turned and bolted back the way we came, our boots splashing through the oily puddles on the mine floor. But the thing was fast. It didn't run like a person, it moved like a spider, its long, spindly limbs clicking against the stone. Clack. 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 Jax tripped. His headlamp flew off, the beam spinning wildly across the ceiling. Before he could get up, the thing was on him. It didn't bite him. It didn't claw him. It pinned him to the floor with its weight, which Jax later said felt like being crushed by a pile of wet sand. Then, it pressed its face against his lower back, right over his spine. I watched in horror as a long, fleshy tube, like a trunk, extended from the creature's throat. It had a hard, serrated tip. It punched through Jax's jacket, through his skin, and latched onto his vertebra. The sound. God, the sound. It was a wet, rhythmic slurping. Jax's scream didn't last long. He didn't die, not yet. But his legs went limp. He stared at me, his eyes wide, as his face began to sink. Not because he was losing blood, but because the thing was sucking the marrow straight out of his bones. It was hollowed him out from the inside, didn't leave him. I couldn't. I hit the thing with my heavy mag light, over and over, until it hissed and retreated into a crevice in the wall. I dragged Jax. He was light. He was terrifyingly light, like he was made of balsa wood. He was whimpering, a soft, bubbly sound. "I can't feel my ribs," he wheezed. "I can't feel my chest." We reached a junction, but the path back was blocked. Another one of them, smaller, thinner, was waiting there. It was hunched over a pile of something gray. As my light hit it, I realized what it was doing. It was processing. It was taking a human arm, what looked like an old hiker's limb, and twisting it. It would snap the bone, insert its feeder tube, suck it dry, and then toss the limp, rubbery skin into a corner. There were dozens of them. Skin suits piled up like old laundry. They don't want your meat. They don't want your blood. They want the grease in your bones. The small one looked up. It let out a sound that mimicked Jax's whimper perfectly. "I can't feel my ribs." It chirped, its voice a perfect, haunting copy. Knew we weren't getting out. My light was flickering, red, low battery warning. I found a cache of old blasting caps and a crate of dynamite that had turned into a volatile, oily sludge over 70 years. It was in a storage nook near the main vein. The creatures were surrounding us now. 5. 10. I couldn't tell. Their pale bodies moved in the periphery of my failing light. They were clicking their jaws, a chorus of hunger. Jax looked up at me. His skin was hanging off his skull now, his structure failing as the marrow loss took hold. He couldn't even hold his head up. "Do it," he mouthed. I didn't have a fuse. I had a flare. I cracked it. The red light filled the tunnel, turning the pale monsters into demons of crimson. They flinched, their sensitive pits burning in the glare. I threw the flare into the crate of sweating dynamite. I didn't feel the explosion. I just felt a sudden, massive pressure, and then, wait. Thousands of tons of Appalachian limestone coming down to claim its debt. They never found the bodies. The search and rescue teams said the mine was too unstable to enter, that the collapse was a natural settling of the earth. But sometimes, if you stand near that boarded-up entrance on a quiet night, you don't hear the wind. You hear a sound like pool balls clicking together. Clack. 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 And if you listen really closely, you might hear a voice. It sounds just like Jack's. It'll say your name. It'll tell you there's something beautiful just inside the dark. Whatever you do, don't go in. Because once they get a taste of what's inside your bones, they never, ever let you go. My sister, Clara, bought the fixer-upper in the deep folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains for pennies. It was an old tobacco farm, abandoned since the 30s, sitting in a valley so steep the sun only hit the porch for 3 hours a day. She invited me up for a week to help clear the brush. "It's peaceful, Elias," she told me over a crackling phone line. "It's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat." When I pulled up the overgrown driveway, the house looked like a skeletal hand reaching out of the earth. The wood was gray, stripped of paint by decades of mountain storms. But it wasn't the house that bothered me. It was the tree in the front yard. It was a black walnut, but it was deformed. Its trunk was twisted like a wrung-out rag, and its roots didn't go into the ground, they seemed to crawl across it, thick and pulsating, like wooden veins. "Don't trip over those," Clara laughed, leaning against the porch railing. She looked thin. Her skin had a yellowish, waxy cast to it, and her eyes were bloodshot. "The soil is thin here. They have to hunt for water." That first night, the peace Clara promised felt more like a threat. The silence in those hills isn't empty, it's expectant. I was sleeping on a cot in the living room when I heard a sound from the floorboards. Slurp. Pop slurp. It sounded like someone trying to drink the last bit of a milkshake through a straw. I sat up, clicking on my flashlight. The beam hit the corner of the room where the floor met the wall. A root, one of the black, gnarled roots from the tree outside, had pushed its way through a gap in the baseboard. It wasn't just sitting there. It was moving. It was twitching, the tip of it wet and red. I looked over at Clara's bedroom door. It was hanging open. "Clara," I whispered. No answer. I stood up, my bare feet cold on the wood, and walked toward her room. The slurping sound grew louder. I pushed the door open. Clara was lying on her bed, her back to me. But she wasn't alone. 3 thick, bark-covered roots had snaked through the window and were wrapped around her waist and throat. They weren't strangling her. They were feeding. One root was pressed firmly against the crook of her elbow. I could see the pulse of her blood moving out of her arm and into the wood, the root turning a deep, bruised purple as it drank. "Wake up!" I screamed, lunging for her. She turned her head. Her eyes were dull, the pupils blown wide. She didn't look scared. She looked hollow. "It's okay, Elias," she droned, her voice sounding like sand rubbing together. "The tree is hungry. The valley hasn't had a good rain in months. It needs the salt. It needs the warmth." I grabbed a pocket knife from my jeans and hacked at the root on her arm. A thick, viscous red spray hit my face. It didn't smell like sap. It smelled like the copper of a fresh wound. The tree screamed. Not a human scream, but a high-pitched, metallic grinding of wood against wood that shook the entire house. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath me erupted. The creature didn't come from the woods. It was the woods. Out of the darkness beneath the house, a torso emerged made of tightly woven briars and petrified wood. It had no face, just a vertical slit lined with jagged flint stones. Its fingers were long, flexible taproots that dripped with a clear, paralyzing nectar. It lashed out, a root whipping across my chest, slicing through my shirt and skin. The pain was instant, followed by a terrifying numbness. I fell. I watched, unable to move, as the creature climbed onto the bed. It moved with the creaking sound of an old ship in a storm. It didn't want Clara anymore. She was spent, a pale, shriveled husk of the sister I knew. It wanted fresh soil. It wanted me. It leaned over me, the flint teeth in its central slit grinding together. A root, tipped with a hollow, needle-like thorn, hovered inches above my jugular. "We are the fertilizer," Clara whispered from the bed, her voice fading into nothing. "We make the hills green, Elias. We give them what they lack." The creature pressed the thorn into my neck. I felt my heart skip a beat as the suction began. It felt like my very soul was being pulled through a straw. My vision started to tunnel. I could see the creature's body beginning to bloom, tiny, Pale white flowers were erupting from its wooden skin, fed by my life. It wasn't a monster. It was a parasite that had been farming these hills for centuries, calling out to people, drawing them to peaceful valleys just to turn them into. With the last bit of strength in my left hand, I reached for the oil lamp I'd knocked over earlier. The kerosene had pooled near the broken floorboards. I didn't have a lighter, but the creature's fingers were scraping against the stone fireplace as it moved. I kicked a heavy brass poker, knocking it into the embers that were still glowing in the hearth. A spark flew. The kerosene ignited with a whump. The creature didn't move fast enough. It was made of dry wood and oil-rich sap. It went up like a torch. The scream it let out this time tore the skin of my eardrums. It thrashed, its flaming roots whipping around the room, setting the curtains, the bed, and Clara on fire. I dragged myself toward the door, the numbness in my legs making every inch feel like a mile. I rolled off the porch and into the dirt just as the house collapsed into a roaring pyre. I survived. But I'm not whole. The doctors say the numbness in my neck and legs is nerve damage. They don't believe me when I tell them I can still feel the pull. Every time I walk past a tree, every time I see a root pushing through the sidewalk, I feel a phantom ache in my veins. Because the fire didn't kill the roots. They go deep. Miles deep. And somewhere in those Appalachian hills, a new sprout is coming up. It's pale. It's thirsty. And it remembers my scent. So if you're looking for a quiet place to get away from it all, just remember, the mountains aren't just beautiful. They're hungry. And they've been waiting a long, long time for a fresh drink.